It's 4 o'clock on a Monday. You know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Yeah, baby. This week, starring special guest star Mr. Kevin McNoldy. Yeah. I am tickled pink to have Kevin. I saw his name in our database. And hello, audience. Be right with you. I'm making a slight adjustment on my own microphone, which I don't even see where the hell that is. Anyway, I saw Kevin's name in our database and went, wow, I remember talking to him like in the very earliest days of Taxi, like 30 some years ago. Wonder how he's doing. So I called him up and it was just like old times. I mean, we weren't besties back in the day, but we talked every now and then. And you would have thought that we were like roommates at sleepaway camp or something. We spent a good hour on the phone, of course, geeking out about everything audio. But I am so proud of what he's accomplished and grateful that he's on the show today. So welcome, Kevin, and thank you for taking the time to do this. Let me read you a little bit of his bio. So Kevin is a music producer, audio engineer, mixing engineer, mastering engineer, and songwriter with over 30 years in the business. Earned his music production and engineering degree from Berkeley, where he studied under some of the legends who created the music production and engineering department there, Wayne Wadhams, Dave Moulton, songwriting and arrangement composition under the legendary Pat Pattison, who has spoken at probably 10 road rallies. Kevin has built recording studios across the country, from a jingle house in Nashville to a label production studio in LA to a Virginia studio that launched the careers of numerous artists. He's built a whole bunch of studios around, but now he owns and operates Symphonic Mastering, a private mixing and mastering room in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he spends 50% of his time mixing, 50% of his time mastering, and I pick and choose projects on which I can produce and co-write. He's been a Taxi member since pretty much the beginning. There's always a project or song that I've written on that I think might fit a listing. Over the course of his career, he has produced, mixed, and mastered thousands of projects across virtually every genre, which is important. We were just talking about that, including pop, rock, EDM, bluegrass, folk, country, jazz, video game music, film soundtracks, audiobooks, podcasts, and too many more things to list here. He's worked with artists and songwriters at every level, from beginners to those with multi-platinum status like Dave Matthews. He's also designed studios for others. I'm not going to go into the list of that, but he's also managed a lot of Kickstarter campaigns for crowdfunding. I'm going to have Kevin back in a couple of weeks, and we're going to do a show about Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general. I think that would be cool. Anyway, also, he very kindly, I presumptuously said to him, would you mind giving away a free mastering session? And he charges $75 a song. And it's not just like cursory surface level mastering. He really, really gets into it because of his deep background in all these other related things. He doesn't just look at mastering as, where the Lufs at, what's the dynamic range, how's the EQ curve. He's looking at it from almost like a spiritual way. Is the mastering job he's doing pulling the essence of the song out? And if it's not, then takes a deeper dive into the chain of events that took place before it got to his mastering desk. So pretty interesting guy, and like I said, really happy to have him on the show. In case you missed the email that I sent out the other day, here's a shot. There's Kevin's office. That's where he gets to go to work every day, which I think we could all be a little bit jealous of that. I know I am. So welcome, and let's start out. Mastering, people think that it is some fairy dust magical thing with a unicorn horn sticking out of its forehead, that you can take my mediocre song. Of course, nobody thinks their music is mediocre, but let me rephrase that. We have taxi members who don't get forwarded that will send us an email or give us a phone call saying, do you realize who mastered that? Well, it still could have been a bad pitch. It still could have been a B-plus song. Just because somebody mastered it and maybe did an amazing job of mastering it, really made it as good as it could possibly be. We don't forward on the fact that you got it mastered by somebody who is a real professional. MMS in the chat room says, yeah, shiny turd. Yep, we were having that discussion the other day. We were hanging out. Yeah, all it is a polished turd. Pardon my French. If anybody's got kids in the room, get them out. So I'm going to do a very brief thing about mastering because I'm really old and come from back in the day, and then just hand this over to Kevin, and I will interject questions and banter with him as we go on, and at the end we'll do some Q&A. And don't forget, yes, he's going to give away a free mastering session, which is very cool. So mastering was not invented for fairy dust edition. It was invented because audio really was kind of a new thing back in the 30s and 40s. And I pull out a prop. This, which I've shown before, is a lacquer. It's a moldy lacquer that was floating in water in somebody's basement. But this is what they put on a lathe and use a diamond needle that is vibrated by electromagnetic pulses, which cut the grooves in the lacquer. Now, when they were exciting that needle to cut those grooves, which basically looks like Star Wars flying through a canyon with little ridges on the side, and it's a V-shaped groove, but if the groove was too deep, it would go all the way down to the metal that's contained within the lacquer. And if by some act of stupidity they actually plated that, made a metal stamper, which I'll show you in a moment, out of that, and made the record out of something with grooves that were too deep, you would get bleed through to the other side, because remember, records had side 1 and side 2. So they had to use mastering to make sure that these safe parameters of audio levels, number 1, were good. Number 2, they wanted to make sure that all the tracks had a certain sonic uniformity to them, that they all had a similar amount of bass and a similar amount of mid-range, similar amount of treble, and a similar amount of dynamic range, which, you know, one song could have been an up-tempo thing with a larger band, and another thing could be a very legato, tender little ballad, but yet they can't be at dramatically, or shouldn't be at any varying levels. It should be perceived as being at the same level. So mastering started out as a function of uniformity and technical safety, but became an art form when mastering engineers had to take something, let's say Frank Sinatra record, and they did a lot of it at Capitol Studios A in Hollywood, but then maybe Frank was in New York and they did stuff at RCA Studios there, different console, different room, different players, different engineer. And so now the guy who is putting these songs on the master disc, which will make the metal stampers that will stamp the LPs on vinyl, that gentleman has to achieve that sonic consistency and uniformity. So then it became an art form. And then ultimately it became a digital art form with the advent of digital recording and CDs and DATs. And now it's a little different form of the art form because it is people master for Spotify and other digital formats. So, but yet there's this perception out there that if my thing is mastered, they're certainly going to want it. So we're probably going to dispel that today. And before we get into the thick of it here with Kevin, I just want to show you what these metal stampers look like. Oops. Where the heck did they go? Oh, here they are. So from those lacquer discs, for those of you who haven't seen this 20 times on the Quarantini happy hours during the lockdown, these are what they plate the approved lacquers with. And then actually there are mothers and stampers and, you know, but for argument's sake, ease of presentation today, this is what they stamp. They take a thing that's the size of a hockey puck made out of polyvinyl, and they put it in there and go, and that's where LPs come from. So there you go.
And there was an original loudness war, if you've heard about the loudness war when CDs kind of became the thing.
Yeah.
There was actually a little bit of a loudness war with jukeboxes back in the day because they had a preset volume for all tracks coming out. So then producers started pushing to get their vinyl pressed louder so they would jump out at people and sound better. So this has been a thing since recorded music began, that everybody wants to be loud.
Well, we're going to get into that. We are going to talk about Lufs because I think some people might be a little overly obsessed about Lufs. Maybe I'm wrong and maybe they're not. But, back in my day, if you developed a sense of the dynamics of what you were mixing, and if it was tipping slightly into the red every now and then, depending at what your settings were on your 2-track machine that you were mastering to, you could pretty much get by without any sort of anything, and then just hand it off to a mastering engineer that would ensure the uniformity and the sonic uniformity, the levels, all that stuff, the dynamic uniformity. So hang on. All right. Why don't you launch into your stuff, and I'm going to interject those things that I sent you when appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about Lufs, or we can kind of go into sort of the definition of mastering.
Let's go into the definition of mastering. Let's save Lufs for later, because that would be, without this precursor, it might be over the heads of some people.
Yeah. So the description of mastering itself, just in its most basic form, is it's the final part of the production process where the final EQ, compression, limiting, and processing is done to shape the sound into the official version that listeners will experience. And it's usually done by an engineer who's outside of the production and mixing process. So you get a fresh set of ears on the song. And in the case of when this started becoming an art form, and Bob Ludwig kind of became the biggest mastering engineer of all time, a lot of records that everybody was working on at the time, including some of mine, got mastered by Bob Ludwig because the record label would be like, well, his name has to go on there.
Right.
And he did, you would want that. Every producer would be like, oh, thank God they're going to pay for it. We want his name on it. But also, he really is the person I think most identified at the start who turned it into this art form where that post-production process, that final bit, was just as important as anything else along the chain. So the definition of this today is not that mastering is there to make the song perfect. It's there to make the perfect version of what the artist and the producer envisioned. In other words, a lot of people will assume that, you're balancing the frequencies perfectly, you're getting things super loud, and that's the ultimate version of what you're going for. But it's not that simple. Everything is relative. It's about getting the emotion across. That's the intention behind the song. And sometimes that means it's dark and a little quieter. Sometimes that means it's super loud and in your face and bright. Some records are mastered so you can have the window down while you're driving and the wind is hitting your ear and you can still hear the song.
Is there a preset for that in software?
Yeah. Like the Chris Lord Algae mixes, like if you hear anything he's mixed, the Green Day, that's sort of that mindset of you can have the top down on the car and you still hear everything in the song because it's very put into a window that projects out. Yeah. And then if you hear some of the Billie Eilish stuff that's slower and darker and deeper, they're going to try to, you're not going to hear everything with the top down on the car, but these are built more for headphone experiences. These are built for just sort of losing yourself in the entire album process. So to me, it's not a one size fits all. It's relative to the project, relative to the emotion of the song. And even on a full album, it's there to create uniformity between the tracks as a whole, but it's also there to truly express each song and have it flow so that everything paces well together. But even if there's volume jumps between songs, it's there for a reason. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it all makes perfect sense. Do you want to keep going, or do you want me to interject?
The thing I wanted to say is, like, I tried to figure out a way to correlate this to help explain it better in case anybody doesn't understand it fully. And the best thing I came up with is, like, let's talk about color grading on films, okay? So actors act in the film that's written by the screenwriter. The director is in charge of that. The producers are in there as the money people to keep things flowing. This is done for a movie studio. When they go to post-production, they're editing that. There's a score being written. There's all this stuff is happening. The final part of the post-production of a film, which sometimes happens during editing, sometimes happens on its own, but they go in and they create the final color grade for that film. So this is the final part of the process where the actual saturation of the colors, the vibrancy of the colors, maybe it's muted or it's in black and white, maybe it's like a Wes Anderson film where it's super pastel. Or
the hues. You could shoot something, at a certain hour of the day and the sun's at a certain level. Everybody's got kind of an orangish cast to their skin, whereas stuff they shot at midnight, everybody's got a little bit of green. So if you cut from one scene to another, you notice that. So color grading adds that level of color uniformity.
It's that final bit that is the hopefully getting across the emotional intent behind every scene, behind every line, behind every angle they shot. And although it seems like it's not important, it's actually just as important as anything else going on in the production, because that's the final layer to translate what they've written, what they've acted, what they've directed, and what they've edited to emotionally hit the viewer. And if they get it right and you're wowed by the color, or you're drawn into the scene because it's so 3D and the colors are drawing you in, then it works. Mastering is exactly the same thing. It's for audio, so it's, you're not creating a visual, but mastering is there to draw you into the music. Mastering is there to create the final bridge between the end listener and the intent from the producer, the writer, the performer, to draw them in. The best records are the ones where you can put it, and how things work today with young people is, they're going to give you 5 to 10 seconds. So if you don't grip them through every part of that process, including that final mastering, within a few seconds, they're just going to swipe and move on. So it's vital to anything that we're talking about. It's vital to your product. And it's the thing that's probably the least understood out of anything out there.
Oh, it's definitely, definitely the least understood. I get troubled by the fact that I'm going to make a statement here from the film and TV music side of the industry, that if there are two pieces of music, one is an A- and it's beautifully mastered. The other one is an A, and I'm talking not quality of the material, but A- for fitting well into the scene and elevating the mood or emotion or action in the scene. The other one is, so the better one was not mastered. The one that's slightly, almost imperceptibly less good was mastered. I would contend that no music supervisor on the planet in the history of man living on the planet has ever said, this one's ever so slightly less good, but it was mastered. Let's use it. However, you could have such a disjointed, wow, who mixed that? It's like a great song, perfect fit for the vibe of the scene, for the story, the emotion, the action, all that stuff. But yet, there's just something that you can't really describe. The mix just does not work. Now, that could affect you, But mastering wouldn't fix that problem either.
Yeah, exactly. It's, to me, mastering being the final part of the chain should never be viewed as a fix for something that might be wrong further up. It should be the identifier that something isn't working, and then you go back and figure that out. So to me, like, the best mastering jobs that I've done, I've mastered my own mixes, and I know how to mix them so that when I go to mastering, it's just a subtle enhancement. And I've worked with some of the bigger mixing guys in the world, and what they hand me is just like, it's perfect. You know, I'm just going in and doing full enhancements here or there. And then with a lot of beginners, there's a lot of like, okay, this isn't working. The low end is fighting. The compressor is overreacting to sub information that's just overwhelming things. So a lot of that stuff is circling back around and going, hey, can we talk about this? Because I'd like to go to your mix and let's figure things out. Or you can send me stems and then I can kind of tweak this in a more granular way, and then we can talk about what I did.
Do other mastering engineers ever ask for stems, or is that something that you do because you're also a mixing engineer?
I think they provide for it and sometimes charge extra for it. But I don't charge any extra for that. I don't charge any extra as a mix engineer for creating the stems because I think it's so important. And especially with somebody who needs help in the mixing stage, if I get stems, I can kind of go in as a mix engineer and help work that out so it's a better mix, but then teach them, like, here's what helped that. So instead of thinking about stems or the mastering process, let's go back and look at how you're mixing and how we can improve that process. Now, invariably, this ends up helping me because the mastering gets easier, you know, because the more we fix on the front end of that, the better it is that we get into mastering, and it's not there to fix something, it's there to enhance what's already good.
Okay, so back again, long time ago, 35, 40 years ago for me. But back when I was still actively working in studios in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I had an SSL, and it had the best mix bus compressor, the most usable mix bus compressor on the market, certainly, one of the first, actually. And I love that thing. And so when I was mixing, some guys I know would actually turn on the mix bus compressor as they were mixing, which not my cup of tea, but I would do my mix, get all my moves, get my balance, get everything where I liked it, and thought to myself, this sounds like a record. Then I would turn on the mix bus compressor, and that oftentimes added what people call that sheen, that professional sound. Yeah. Because a lot of people who aren't experienced audio engineers listen to their stuff, and then they listen to the stuff that's on radio, records, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Forget YouTube. And they listen to it. They go, "It's got that magic sound, that thing that makes it sound so slick," and that is part of mastering. But I want you to elaborate, because you said something the other day that I'd never heard before that fascinated me, and I'll get to that in a second. But basically, I tried to pre-master my stuff by using the mix bus compressor just a little bit, not a lot, but just catch the peaks, maybe take the whole thing and squash it just a little bit, but like a 3-to-1 ratio, nothing intense. And I never EQ'd my final thing because I loved my audio spectral balance of frequencies. I knew my room well. I knew my speakers well. I would check outside of the room. So you said something the other day that goes way beyond all that. You talked about even changing like spatial relationships and depth perceptions and stuff in mastering. Give an example of when that would be needed, and then tell us how that's accomplished. You could do MS processing, mid-side processing, so you're processing the middle of the signal versus the outside in the stereo field.
So you can get very three-dimensional in your approach. You can also be treating the transient response between the stereo field and the middle differently. So there's a lot of like, if I get something that's mixed and it's a good mix, but it's a bit of a flat presentation, I can get in there and make the kick and snare really pulse right in your face, right in the middle, and the vocal right in your face, but then I can sort of spread the sides out and create more of a 3D effect around it.
Let's talk about mid-side for a second, because that's a phrase that's probably new to a lot of our viewers. How can we explain that without getting as technical as it could be?
We're getting to that before Lufs, so we might be jumping too far. But
okay, then let's save it for the right before Lufs. Yeah,
the one thing I would say before we jump into that is I mentioned like the Billie Eilish sound, because like a lot of this is, again, I'll talk a lot about relativity with this, because for example, I don't think anybody listened to Charlie XCX's Brat album and thought, oh my God, what a pristine sound. Like, it's very raw, it's very lo-fi, but the energy that you sonically receive from that record, despite its sort of like lo-fi and very raw nature, makes it stand out so much that it's the perfect presentation for those songs. And it's sloppy, and there's like auto-tune all over the place, and it's crazy. So an engineer would look at that and go, what is this? What have they done? 14-year-old puts that on and goes, man, that really hits me, and it makes me want to dance. It makes me want to move. It does something on the dance floor. So when we're talking about mastering, when we're talking about fixing things or making the frequency balance right, it's all relative. It doesn't mean you look at a chart and there's a perfect line. It means perfection is what gets the emotion that's intended across the best way. So that might be this line, or that might be the straight line. I've worked on jazz albums, fusion albums, where I mixed or I mastered, and it's very clean, very straight. You know, it's all about punch and dynamics, and we're staying away from lo-fi presentation. We're staying away from anything that's sonically destroyed on purpose. It's all very clean and open, and you can hear every little detail. And then I've worked on albums where the whole point is like the emotion is in the lo-fi quality, the emotion is in the darkness. Make it muddy. This does, like, we're kind of leading into the discussion about AI mastering and what's wrong with it. Because and we'll get to Lufs and kind of the technical side of things, but when I talk about the relativity of mastering, bringing out the best for what that song or what that album needs, even if that means that it's dark or it's off-puttingly lo-fi, but that gets the emotion across, this is where AI really doesn't work, because AI is going in, analyzing the frequency response, comparing it to an average, balancing it, and maybe giving you a few choices, and that's great. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but it's not based on human emotion. It's based on a chart. And so you can use AI mastering, you might get a decent result, but I guarantee you, if you compare it to a human being mastering the same thing, as long as you've had communication between the mastering engineer, the mix engineer, the artist, about the intention of that you'll get a better result. And so we'll get into this as we keep going, but one of the questions we were going to talk about is like, what do I think of AI mastering, and what I think is the same thing as what I thought when I tried Suno for the first time. I typed something in, I was like, let's see how good this thing is, and it spit out a song, and I was like, oh God, that's really good. And then like a day later, I listened to the result again, and I'm like, that sounds like really 90s, you know? And like, why does it go through it did 2 verses and it took like 2 minutes to get to the chorus. Why did it do that? And why are the lyrics like they're not speaking like a human being would. It's weird. They're just fitting the rhymes in. It's not quite there. And then I listened the next day and I'm like, the vocals that it came up with don't just sound auto-tuned. They sound like really disturbingly flat, And so you go from like being blown away by the technology and how far it's come to going, oh, this is just really pretty awful. Like I can see an application for it here and there, but it's and like if you're idea generating, maybe it helps, and then step away from it as quickly as possible and make it human. And I think AI mastering suffers from the same kind of thing. It may impress you at first because it gets louder. It may impress you at first because it straightens that line out. But what does it really mean? If you listen to that a year later or you compared it to a human being mastering the same thing, I think you'd have a different opinion with some perspective or time away from it.
So all this leads me to the big question, which is most people, and I'm not saying this is a put down, I think it's probably a fact, most people don't really understand what it is that mastering, why they want to get something mastered, what it can do for them, other than the fairy dust principle. If I get it mastered by somebody who's really good, or get it mastered by AI or using a plugin or whatever, it's going to put fairy dust on it. It sounds to me, in a perfect world, like a client would call you up, whether it's an artist or producer or whomever, and say, I would love to have you master this project. I've listened to 5 or 6 of your other things that you've mastered, thought you did a great job for them. What I'm looking for is this, so that you have a direction. But then you could make an argument the other way, which is the fresh pair of ears theory, which is, okay, here's somebody that applies fresh ears for a living. Maybe they should go in blind. Maybe instead of chasing down the rabbit hole that you've created by listing off your desire, they're given open, free range to do whatever they think is right. Maybe that's the secret sauce. Which scenario is best, or do they both have their place?
I think they both have their place. I always like to, whether I'm mixing or mastering, my approach is always, I want to get inside that artist or that producer's head as much as possible. So even if it's just a single song, I'm always of the mindset of like, put together a few songs into a Spotify playlist and send me the link. And you're not going to sound like them, but I want to understand what you like. And instead of you describing to me what you like, show me sonically.
That's a
what
great
terms
idea.
You want.
Yeah.
And we still talk back and forth, and I really try to understand what they are wanting to get out of it. But I think it's a great approach because it removes what might be lost in language, because we are talking about music. So why not communicate on a musical level?
I think that's a great idea. It's like, ultimately, it's the public that's going to be the recipient of the music and the mastering. So by providing you, the mastering engineer, with a playlist of stuff that it's not just what they like, it's kind of, where's the ballpark that you hear this fitting in with? Where's your musical and sonic tribe? So exactly. You understand in broad terms, my job is to make this a standout in their tribe.
Yeah. And it may be completely different than what their songs sound like or what the mastering would turn them into. But if I know you like this because the kick snare relationship in that one track that you threw in there hits a certain way, then I know even if it's a different genre, I can try to accomplish that for you. So that's EDM, your rock. We can still cross a bridge there where it can hit you similarly. And some of that might involve saying, like, I can get you close in the mastering, but if we go look at the mix again and we tweak some things, you're going to be right on that. So, yeah, it's a lot of back and forth.
Do you want to keep going? Because I could start hitting you with some questions.
Yeah, sorry. Hopefully I answered.
Yeah, you did.
Deeper. So
I think.
Let's talk about Lufs, because this is the main thing. When you're dealing with Spotify, YouTube, any of this, and or even like submitting to production libraries, Lufs is what you have to pay attention to these days. So Lufs stands for loudness units relative to full scale, and you can think of Lufs as a measurement that's like similar to the decibel or to RMS value. But Lufs was created to factor in loudness based on the human interpretation of the tonal balance of sound. So in other words,
when you say, okay, keep going.
Yep. So there's a few different types of Lufs. Short term, which analyzes the last 3 seconds. I'm reading from my stuff I wrote out about this, so we don't miss anything. Integrated Lufs gives you the value for the entire duration of the track played. This is the one that we're talking about most of the time, is the full track being played. And when Spotify says we want minus 14 Lufs, that's what they mean. You play the song start to finish, minus 14, which is not what anybody should do or wants, but that's what they say. So it's like RMS, it's like a decibel, except these are all measurements of loudness, but Lufs adds in human perception. So this is just a way to speak about how loud is that in a manner that hopefully, if it's accurate, speaks by how we actually hear. So the thing that you hear the most about this is, and again, we're getting back to the thing where everything is relative. So Spotify claims they want minus 14 Lufs range in your final mix. If you listen to Green Day, any of these sort of EDM songs, any of the stuff on like the Pop Rising playlist on Spotify, they're usually like -6 to -7. So they're a lot louder than that. The thing about Spotify that makes this all relative is that there's a preference setting called normalize volume in your Spotify preferences. This will change over time. It may have already changed, but the last time they posted about this year, they said their own stats are 87% of listeners don't know that preference setting is there, so they leave it on. In other words, no matter what your Lufs value, no matter how it's mastered, whether it's -14, -6, they're going to match the volumes of the songs before and the songs after you. Everybody shows up at relatively the same volume for 9 out of 10 people who listen to you on Spotify. So, in other words, if you follow the -14, that's your choice. It'll be a very open dynamic range for like a jazz album. That's what I would go for an orchestral album. I'd go for around there. If I'm mastering for vinyl, I'm usually hovering like -12 to -14. But the relativity of this is that you should be mastering your song for what's good for the song. What gets the emotion across for what you want. If you are looking for raw, heavy aggression, hard rock, heavy metal, speed metal, like, you should not be anywhere close to -14. You should be pushing that all the way to -7, -6. Lady Gaga's new album is like -6.5, -7, right around there. So very loud. And 9 out of 10 people are going to experience that song at the same volume as anything else. I produced a bluegrass duo that I've done a bunch of albums with, Robin and Linda Williams, and we did their last single, and I mastered it a little softer in volume than everyone else, and it plays back to back with anything, an EDM song, and it's the same volume. So you do what's right for the song. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are overly obsessed with Lufs. I brought up something a couple of weeks ago in a Taxi TV that people will go for a brick wall that they.
That's the worst, yeah.
Yeah, and if you're a video editor and you're auditioning tracks, a lot of it starts out, first of all, the title has to portend what the music could sound like to get your interest to the point where you click play. Or you go look at it as soon as you open up that file and you see a brick wall. You don't know if it's got good edit points in there. So you've already hurt yourself, maybe reduced your chances of getting something listened to and ultimately licensed because the waveform looks like a brick wall. So there's that as a little side issue. But
there's something else to take into consideration, especially for things that you're submitting to Taxi listings, music libraries and production music things. Like these songs, you know, it's one thing if it's an artistic expression and it's on Spotify and you want to be out there with Lady Gaga and stuff. If you're talking about something that's going to be synced to film, you are competing with dialogue, you're competing with sound effects. There's all these other things going on in a scene. And if you're just coming in there blasting, it'll sound impressive because it's loud, but you're stepping on everyone else in that chain.
It'll sound impressive to you,
it'll
the
sound
creator.
Impressive to you. That person mixing that thing is going to be turning around to the music supervisor going, what is this? I have to turn it down so far to even hear what they're saying. And they're going to start scooping out the EQ to leave room for the voice. If there's sound effects going on, they need to have impact on those. And if you're squashing all the dynamic range with what you did, again, it might sound impressive, but there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. I mentioned this when we chatted the other day, like The Rookie is like a great example of this because they use indie music in The Rookie, the TV show, but they'll do a chase scene, and in the middle of it, like the chase scene will start, and then they'll use an indie track that's like a dance. It's fast. They've got 16th notes on the hi-hat happening, and they're chasing and they're shooting and all this, and they're shouting at each other. So like you're last on that list. You are creating momentum for that scene. You're creating drama for that scene, but there has to be space in there for all the dynamics of guns going off, running, panting, screaming, you know, traffic noise, things blowing up. So the other point of this is like the relativity of it is like, especially if you're talking about not so much your artistic statement, but you're trying to get into music libraries, you're trying to get into production music. You're there to serve the people that can take your songs and sync them. And if you don't behave that way sonically, it's off-putting.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
It does. It makes great sense. And frankly, I was shocked the other day. I can't remember. I think it was during an episode of Taxi TV. And I asked how many libraries ask people to turn stuff in mastered. And the answer I got back was many, if not most of them. And honestly, I mean, a lot of music libraries. I may know more music library owners than any other person on the planet. I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm just the nature of what we do here. And, you know, several of these people are friends of mine that I could be sitting on my couch at home with my feet up watching a TV show talking to a music library owner because they're a friend. So I know them well enough to know that they wouldn't know the difference between something that was mastered and something that was not. They would have to guess, and they'd probably be right 50, 60, 70% of the time. But they don't have ears, and it's not that they're stupid. They don't have training. As a music library owner, they never lived in a studio complex and got to go hang out in the mastering room with a guy like you and ask a question. Why did you do that? Drive you crazy until they start to really understand mastering at a deep level. So therefore, level matching is important in a library. When a music supervisor is in a genre, let's say dramedy cues, go with instrumental for the moment. And they're in that genre. If the first one is at a fairly robust level, the next one is at a wimpy level. The next one is somewhere between robust and wimpy. The next one is back to robust, 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 and then wimpy again. The wimpy ones aren't going to get licensed because chances are the music supervisor is just going to skip them, going, there's something about the fidelity. It's just because it's not the same level. So I would postulate, using a big word from when I was in high school maybe, that the music library owners say yes. When somebody says, would you like it mastered, they reflexively give a knee-jerk response of yes, because they would like a certain amount of consistency in levels. It saves them from hearing a track that they really love, having to reach back out to the person who created it. Hey, by the way, I love the track, but it's really wimpy. I think this thing needs to come up 3 or 4 dB, maybe 6. I don't know. I guarantee you, if you asked most music library owners to define a Luf, they'll
go, huh?
It's something that a sail does on a windless day on a sailboat. I don't know. It's so. I was shocked. I was literally floored by that answer, and then I realized after we stopped the show, the library owners. They, just for those of you who might have seen that, and I can't even remember who I was talking to on the show, don't believe for a second that a library owner is going to hear a track that they know they can make money with, but because they were told it wasn't mastered, that they're going to pass on it. They might say to you, the level's a little wimpy. Can you send me back another version and bring it up a few dB so it matches the levels of other stuff in the dramedy thing? So please, everybody, just remember that mastering is good. It's a cherry on top, especially if it's done well, but it's not something that's going to prevent a library owner from saying, I can make money for both of us with this track.
Let
me
respond to that quick.
Sure.
The goal to me with mastering is that you should get to the point as a mixing engineer, and if you guys are writing this stuff and mixing your own music, that mix should get to the point where it's the same as like when I master something for a huge mixing person. Like, I get that track, it's usually got a bunch of mix bus processing on it, it's close to a finished master, and I'm just enhancing slightly. If I'm doing my job as a mastering engineer, it's not about just fixing your thing on my own and just handing it to you and going, there you go, it's the perfect version of it and it's loud. It's that extra part that I bring to it because of my background and doing these other aspects. I'm not just a mastering engineer, I'm a producer and a musician, is that I want to help you do your best to have your music shine in the best possible way. So you should be able to get to the point as a mix engineer that how you set up your mix, how you group your channels, how you can create stems from those groupings, how you process your mix bus gets you so close that that library would be fine with what you send them. Mm-hmm. There might be that additional enhancement that I can provide and that level boost might work better, but they wouldn't be able to, as novices on the level of, they know music, they're music supervisors, they're dealing with this every day, but they can't technically articulate the things that we're talking about better than a 14-year-old could. Right. And that's the thing. A lot of this is like, what's going to work for the scene, what costs a certain amount, what is the right energy, and that's where it ends. So my goal for anyone that I work with is I want them to keep coming back because I'm adding something to what they're doing, but also in the things that you need to churn stuff out quickly, you need to get stuff overnighted. I want to get you to the point where you can handle that and then use me for the important things, and that's great. But like, you have improved so much that you're able to just go, I know this will work. Kevin could add something to that, but I don't need him for this thing. I can just get this out right away. I actually was daydreaming about our interview today over the weekend, and I realized that
excluding things like big trailer orchestral stuff, but your average dramedy cue or attention cue, it's just a bunch of synth pads, blah, 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 that very little reason to get that stuff mastered. But if you've created a very sensitive, heartfelt ballad that could very well be in a montage at the end of a scene that's got everybody in the family room crying, mastering could be important for that, because the dynamics would add a lot to the emotion and the sort of cosmic energy that song could deliver. And chances are the song is going to be pushed up in the mix. It's going to be featured. There's not going to be dialogue. So mastering could be really important. Conversely, a ZZ Top kind of song, a Southern rock, a 38 special, whatever, that's playing in the back of a bar scene, ostensibly a jukebox that's 75 feet away, and you can't even tell who the artist is or for sure what kind of music. It's adding vibe to the room and ambiance to the room. Mastering is not going to get you that placement any faster. Are those all fair statements coming from somebody that is a Taxi member, a songwriter, a producer, a mastering engineer, mixing engineer? You really are the more whatever quinfecta of talents.
I try to be rounded. I think the other thing of that too is you have to weigh the cost versus what you're going to get from that. So if it's a more low price listing, and it's a smaller library, I mean, just getting somebody music, but in the mindset of like what I'm saying, of like getting better with every single mix, getting your entire template worked out to where you can very quickly get something close in your mix that's going to be enough for what some of the smaller libraries would want. Weigh that against the cost of mastering, weigh that against the extra time it would take, that kind of thing, and just use it when it's absolutely vital. When it's absolutely vital, in my mind, is when you're competing against somebody who's going to do something to make a difference, to stand out. And this is why, like, when it's regular album production, when it's single production and it's going up on Spotify, no expenses spared, no time is spared. We do whatever it takes as a music producer to make the song work. Tearing it down, putting it back together, mixing it 15 times, doing, automating the bridge again because it's just not hitting when you listen to it 3 weeks later. So if I know I'm walking into a room and I'm competing against somebody on my level, I'm going to do what it takes. I'm going to master that. I'm going to have everything ready to go. I would look at it this way, and you can relate this to like going to a Taxi road rally. Your stuff should sound good enough, be presented well enough in the context of that music library or whoever you're dealing with, so that you're at the road rally, you get into the elevator, and there's one of the people that we're on a panel, and you have 20 seconds to make your pitch. You better be able to hold that phone up or whip out your iPad and play your song, and it projects into the elevator enough to get their attention. That's your shot. So what does it take to win the elevator pitch? And also, what does it take to win the elevator pitch against other people who are doing the extra steps and making sure it's right?
I'm just saying, I'm not whipping out anything in an elevator. I think you can get in trouble for that. Especially, I know. Okay, so mastering plugins, there are a bunch of them. I would say, anecdotally, what I've heard over the years is that Ozone is probably the best known and most frequently used. And I know, by the way, I should preface my comments. I'm pretty well educated about mastering back in the day, because at the studio I worked at, Criteria, which is actually behind me right there, I could go in the mastering room and hang out with my friend Alex Sadkin, who was mastering like the Eagles' greatest hits album. So at Criteria, they wanted the engineers, after you were off the clock and getting ready to go home, go spend an hour in the mastering room, as long as you're not distracting the guy, just absorbing what they're doing. It'll make you a better mixer and cause you to deliver better mixes for mastering. So I knew that stuff. The people who get Ozone and want to become at-home mastering engineers because it's really inexpensive, to do it that way. You could amortize the cost of the software very, very quickly. There's a lot of room for them to make dangerous mistakes with that software because they don't know what they're doing. So, number one, am I right in making that statement that that tool in the hands of somebody that doesn't know what they're trying to do with it, it could make things worse than not being mastered at all?
Yeah.
And the second part of the question is, how do they train themselves to use that tool effectively if that's the route they're going to go?
Yeah. To me, this goes back to some of what we were saying earlier, and that is, and like I use Ozone. I will sometimes have it go in and check out a track just so I see what kind of curve it comes up with. I would say I've maybe used it once in 1,000 times, wow. Where I was like, that's pretty close. I think the discipline with these kind of tools is the same as talking about AI, and especially Ozone. Like, for Ozone to make itself sound worth the money, Ozone is going to analyze your track, and it's going to be very dramatic in its presentation to you. So, a lot of people would be like, what am I paying for if it just did slight EQ adjustments and it didn't really get louder? So anytime that I scan something with Ozone and see what it comes up with, it's like, boom! And then the stereo width is all over the place, and it never quite works because it's so dramatic. However, there are lessons in an EQ curve that it has, or how it might assume the stereo spread should go, because you can multiband change the stereo width of things. And another one that I think is good that's new is the Waves Curves AQ, which they're calling like an autonomous EQ, which is, so it's the same kind of concept. It's scanning your track, and then it's coming up with a few different EQ curves that it thinks are going to make it better. And you can choose between them, but then it can either work statically or it can kind of adjust itself as the mix goes. So as interesting as that is, like, use these tools. They're inexpensive relatively, but rather than like put one of these on and get its recommendations and go, there it is, it's done. If you really listen into a lot of what Ozone comes up with, it's very squashed, it's very overdone. It's stepping on dynamics. It's stepping on microdynamics, especially. Like, the things I like in Ozone are the things that I never find it comes up with on its own. I like the transient control in Ozone, and I like pushing that into its own limiter, and then it creates this back and forth, especially in drums, that I think really works. Now, if you have it calculate that on its own, it never does that, because that would be wrong. So I would take any kind of recommendations for these kind of AI types of things, and then I would replicate that if you think it's a good idea. If you like where it's going, but you know you could do it in a more sort of mature way than what it shows you, I would go back to your group tracks. I would go back to your individual tracks, and that's where I would start massaging the EQ, massaging the stereo width in the group track of all the drums. I would go back and take the recommendation if you think it's good, and get into the discipline of fixing your mix to match that, and then turn it off. I think I wrote down the Softtube has like the Weiss plugins. They're really good. They're expensive, but I have the hardware, and it's like an exact duplicate of the hardware. Software also has the Flow mastering suite, which is just like Ozone. It's scanning your song and it's creating presets for it. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, I think that it gets pretty close to something that could work, but you get a better result if you take that recommendation, if it's moving in the right direction, and figure that out yourself in your mix.
Well, it kind of like somebody owning a $6,500 Hasselblad camera. Me, I'm not a photographer. You can give me a $6,500 Hasselblad with a $3,200 lens, and my result is probably not going to look significantly different than if I had a $400 Canon, whatever, just a fairly basic SLR or DSLR. So it's great that you're recommending those products, but if you don't understand how, you know what, let me turn this into a question.
Yep.
How can the people watching the show today best train themselves to develop mastering ears?
Yeah. It's,
I mean, you've touched on it, but is there like a one statement solution?
Yeah, it's not a one statement solution. It's more like I'm kind of one of the last crop of people that Bob Ludwig masters some of my projects. I work with David Glasser of Airshow Mastering. He used to be in North Virginia, so I would go on site to get my projects mastered with him before I became a mastering engineer. And I would just sit there and absorb everything that he was doing, because every subtle EQ move did something. So whether he knew it or not, he was like an incredible teacher. Because I would always be like, oh no, not unattended. I want to show off. and just soak it all in and just learn. So it's, you don't have that anymore. You have YouTube videos. You have like instructional videos on websites. It's not the same thing. It's not the same as hands-on. The thing that you do have an advantage with today is the converters are infinitely better. The headphone amps are infinitely better. The way things are going with headphone technology, like even since you and I talked, and I don't know if I put this in my notes before or not, but like the Slate VSX headphones are about to release version 5 of that. Lewitt just released Space Replicator, which is a headphone correction and room simulation plugin. Neumann has the Neumann Rhyme plugin, which is correction for the NDH30 and NDH20 headphones, and then it does room simulation. So like there's all these technologies at a low price point that can get you to learn this type of thing because the accuracy is so much better. So once you know that you can listen as close as possible to this type of environment where I spent every dime like getting the acoustics perfect in the room, I've stopped at nothing to float every single thing in here so the desk doesn't vibrate, and like my HVAC unit is 10 feet behind the front wall, but it's floated above my head and all this stuff. Like, it's unaffordable to do that. However, you can get the VSX headphones. You can truly learn those rooms. And then you're listening, hopefully, at a level where you're eliminating anomalies that could lead you in the wrong direction. You're taking room nodes out of it. You're taking bad acoustics in your environment out of it. Speakers are still vital to mixing and to mastering, and you need speakers in your studio if anybody's going to hear what you're doing. But I think we're at a point where the self-training that you can do to get the mastering that you want it's good enough that if you really want to learn it, you can pretty much get there. And it's really about listening to the level, learning how to listen to the point that you actually can pick something apart so minutely and hear the difference in the subtlest of changes, that you know what will do what when you're turning knobs. And like, I had the benefit of like, when we talked about Berkeley and we talked about like Wayne Wadham's, Dave Moulton did the whatever that core stuff was, the Golden Ears stuff. So like,
Wow, yeah.
I was in classes where it was ear training, where you're literally just name this frequency and they're just popping a frequency up on the speaker just day after day after day. And this stuff just gets ingrained in you. So you start to adapt your hearing to not just getting a punchy mix, but also how to translate that into a full master that retains all the dynamics and the punch and the three-dimensional presentation of your mix, but ups the ante of every component of that. The height, the width, the depth, the loudness, the way it hits the listener in the chest, and most importantly, if you're talking about that 14-year-old kid who puts headphones on or puts their AirPods in, what makes them respond to it? What makes them cry? What makes them dance? Mastering is a huge component of this because you're taking that mix and you're either making it better to achieve that goal or you're making it worse. So I'm kind of rambling about this, but like one of the biggest things that you can do, and it's not plugin specific, but the one plugin that is really good for this is the what is it? Plugin Alliance, the Adaptor Metric A-B plugin, I think it is.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Adaptor Metric A-B. So it's just it's a comparison plugin where you can load in other mixes or masters, and then you can like level match it to your mix, and then you can bounce back and forth to listen to different references.
What a great tool. And the fact that people can look at, a spectral readout today. Back when I was first starting out, it was a major revelation the first time I turned an equalizer and actually heard what it did and went, oh, wow. And then I just started taking every instrument by itself. I spent an entire 8-hour day one time on nothing but an electric guitar, just sweeping frequencies and sweeping the amplitude if I was boosting or cutting. And you learn so much about the instruments, and that so now you've learned what EQ does to different instruments. Then you start to recognize, okay, same instrument, different key, different tempo, different angle of attack on the pick when it's hitting the strings. All those things are part of that sonic stew that trains your ears to the point where you don't even think about it anymore. You're in the middle of a session, you hear a sound, and you can just reach up and you will be turning the right EQ instantly because you've done it 1,000 other times and you know where it sits. But now for people learning, their learning time can be cut so dramatically down by the fact that they've got these great tools. So understanding frequencies in the context of individual instruments and then applying that also to full mixes. You got to know that stuff.
And to go with that, like every time I've had interns, like at my big studio, Crystal Phonic, in Virginia, like my main comment was always, you're going to learn to EQ, you're going to learn to compress things. But if you don't know for you what is a good kick sound or what is a good snare sound, like just because you throw a mic up on the kick and then you turn the EQ on and twist it, or turn the compressor on and twist the knobs on that, what does that mean? Like, what is a good kick to you? Explain to me what a good kick is. Like, you have to get your hearing to the point where you know how to dial that in because you can explain sonically what a good snare sound is. And that doesn't need to be a real kit. That can be any electronic drums. Like, what is a good electronic snare drum to you? Find the one that really works for you and then figure out how to shape what you have into that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say, and I get this all the time, is like the more seasoned I've become as a mix engineer over the years, the more seasoned I've become as a mastering engineer, the less I do to things. So whatever level you're at, the younger you are or the more inexperienced you are, the more likely you're going to be going like this and cranking it and like going nuts with stuff. And especially with plugins, these are fantastic tools, and that's the great thing about them. It's all sitting there. It's all within financial reach now. You don't have to buy an SSL like you and I did back in the day. But if you're talking about something newer that's like Ozone, that's an entire new design of something. If you're talking about something that's emulating an SSL console like you and I grew up on, you're talking about something that they emulated the circuitry of that based on the gain structure of the original console. So I grew up on those consoles. I know how to gain stage those, so I can bend that sound into it. I know how to EQ it to push that, and the plugin reacts the same way. If you just go in there and blast it and don't gain stage it properly and understand how to bend the sound of that console, it sounds terrible. And then if you go through 5 or 6 different plugins and do the same thing, you're going to be like, Pro Tools sounds terrible. I hate that in-the-box sound that Pro Tools has. It's not Pro Tools. None of them are doing something to your sound. You're doing it to yourself, and it's usually overcooking. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, man, I could geek out with you all day long. This is my jam, as they say. Let's take some audience questions. Don't forget, I am going to give away a free unattended mastering session with Kevin, and whoever wins that is going to be very fortunate. Man, maybe
say the caveat of it's going to be, if you guys, whoever wins, if you don't mind, we will dive deep, even to the point of looking at your mixing environment, your acoustics, any of that. It's all fair game. If you're open to it, we can just do a master, and I can hand it off to you and just describe what I did, or we can go, how do we make this better so you don't need me? I want you to come back to me because what I do is great. I also want you to get to the point where I'm a choice. I'm not a necessity. I should be there to enhance what you're doing and not, oh my God, I hope we can fix this.
It's kind of like a good marriage. It was by choice, not by necessity. Yeah. Think about that. By the way, Zen Chief Engineer, one of the people in the chat room earlier, said the screeners use headphones. Bad assumption, Zen. They used to use headphones when we had 14 of them sitting at cubicles in our office working at the same time. Now it's all done remotely. We've got 3 or 4 people in Nashville. We've got, I don't know, at any given month, probably somewhere between 12 and 20 screeners that are active, depending on what genres are hot and what the workload is like, so on and so forth. Many of them, I'm almost sure, are working using desktop speakers, sitting there with their laptop, probably not using headphones unless kids are home or their room sucks or whatever. So don't mix for headphone listening because you think the taxi screeners are listening on headphones, and you stand a better chance of getting forwarded if you too mixed on headphones. I've got to say, going back to the headphone thing for a minute, I've got whatever the Waves plugin is for Ocean Way Nashville. I've actually been in that room when, like, somebody I knew 15 years ago was mixing in that room. And it's a great control room, by the way. And I love it. It's just, as an old mixer in real rooms, I got to say, these Sims are really incredible. I don't know how accurate they are in mimicking the rooms that they represent. Probably pretty darn good. But the overall experience and the perception that you're in a room, and the fact that when you look down at the faders, as it were, and you hear the sonics change, or you look to the left or look to the right. When I was still mixing, I tended to listen to the left speaker. I don't know why. Probably a variance in how my ears heard things. But if I was really looking for detail, I would tilt my head, listen to the left speaker. And I found myself doing that using software and headphones. So, wow. Let's open it up to some Q&A. There have been some questions that we've been asking people to hold off. And don't let me forget everybody to do the drawing when we're like 5 minutes away from ending today's show. All right. If you have a question, precede it with the word question in all caps so it jumps out easily in the thing. Here's one that I see right now, so I'm going to take it. Question from Ruzek Music. Mixing and mastering ambient music has been challenging, surprisingly to me, but listeners can be listening at lower volumes. So when I mix at super low volumes, it's a challenge. Any tips for mixing at low levels?
I mean, I would recommend everyone mixes at lower levels for any genre, and then check it loud from time to time. It's a lot to get into in terms of how the human ear hears, but basically the louder you get, the more the response of the human ear changes. So it's not enough to just listen softly. You're going to mix the bass a certain way if you have it quiet, and then if you turn it up to check it, it's going to be heavier bass than what you thought. So with a lot of that, I would get to a comfortable lower volume to do the majority of the mix. But then I would always have moments where you step away, come back in, and go really loud for a short time to check the low end. Take another break, come back, get something in between, check it again, and come back and go back to the lower volume that you were at initially. If you check that at different volumes enough times and get used to how it feels then when it's lower again and it's balanced correctly, you're going to be able to mix just straight into that at the lower volume and do even faster loud checks. I think the headphones help with this too, the ones that simulate rooms, because a lot of those, like I know the Lewitt has it, the Slate one has it, they have emulated clubs, so you can actually hear it on a huge like dance floor speaker, and you always want to check it on that. And there's a lot to get into, but a lot of detailed stuff, but like a lot of the things that I'll check on the VSX headphones are like, and it might be different for ambient music, but I'm checking the low end to make sure that the kick is separated from the bass, that they're not stepping on each other, especially in a large club environment like that, but also that the decay of the kick is not continuing too long. I want it to be short enough to get the point across and hit you in the chest. Again, different for ambient music, but think of it the same way. You want to make sure that there's stuff happening down in the low end that's all intentional and there's nothing surprising you.
Wow. If you guys listen to the last 45 seconds of what came out of Kevin's mouth, that's the kind of stuff I would learn hanging out after hours with engineers that were 5 years more advanced than I was when I was early in my career. The kick drum. Where does the note go when it decays? How long does the natural, forget reverb or delays or anything, natural decay of a kick drum? Because that can absolutely interfere with the bass and cause phase anomalies that make your bass guitar now sound thinner. But it only happens sometimes. Why is that? Because of the tuning of the drum, the EQ, the mic, they're all interactive. So by listening enough and experiencing problems enough, you eventually learn to go, oh, I remember the last time this happened, and I solved the problem by changing the tuning of the kick or throwing a little more pillow in there. Anyway, we got a lot more questions and only 7 minutes to go.
Oh, sorry. I was going to just add something to that. Just to say, with EDM music, it's different because there's a lot of side chaining in that, which means the kick will hit and the bass will pull back because it's side chained to it. So you can get EDM tracks very loud because there's only that low end element is only one thing hitting full volume at any given moment, so you can control the total volume of the master better or the mix. In ambient music, if you have percussive elements in there, you want to consider side chaining, not to the point of like an EDM track where the kick hits and the bass is just totally gone, but consider if there's a rhythmic element that there's a just slight side chain, just a few dB, so that the bass is at least getting out of the way a bit just on the initial low end hit of whatever percussion you're using. And that will end up cleaning up some of that low end and create more headroom for you.
All right.
On to the wrong thing about this.
On to the next question. Michael Baldwin asks, could you please speak about the different types of Lufs, integrated, short-term, and momentary?
All you really need to worry about is the integrated Lufs for the entire length of the track, because that's the one that Spotify's talking about and YouTube's talking about. The other ones are helpful in terms of like when I'm mastering, I can go and check if there's a solo section or a bridge that's the loudest point of the track. You can check the short-term Lufs and make sure that you're not exceeding anything in that. This gets a little bit more complicated because in a master, I might be going in and turning down certain parts of the mix, or I might be adjusting things so that we adhere to a certain volume overall. This depends on if it's, the BBC has certain rules about volumes for things. So it's all in context of where it's going and down the line. If it's just going to be a single release on Spotify, it's usually, we're just looking at long term and that's it. And then true peak is the other thing you want to pay attention to. You do not want to clip ever above digital 0. Put a true peak limiter at the end. You should not have to be hitting it hard because you're mixing properly. So the gain staging into it is it's there for protection. And I have found that all these services sound best at a -1 true peak. So I see Isotope actually on their website has a great set of videos that they're putting out where they're analyzing new tracks that are coming out, and they're finding like there's intentional like peaking above 0 up to even 2 dB on some songs, which is the last thing that you want. I don't know why anybody's allowing it, because once you peak over digital 0 and somebody's got this company's in-ears or somebody's got this company's headphones, the nonlinear response of whatever system you're listening through is going to be different. In other words, you just created a moment where something random is going to happen to that audio that you can't control. So don't let that happen.
Here's a question from Richard Emmett. Any suggestions for choosing the most appropriate reference mixes to compare to yours?
It's really up to like what is going to fit the same genre as you. The thing that I would warn you against, which I'm always guilty of, is don't choose something that you like. Like, if Third Line song sounds great, but it's also like your favorite song, you're just putting it in there because you're emotionally attached to it, or you think it's a great riff or whatever. So stick with something that technically is right there with what you want to achieve, not something that maybe you enjoy listening to 1,000 times over, but something that is absolutely inspirational sonically to compare yourself to.
Here's a question from Andre Stepanian. Most people have one set of speakers for tracking and master with those same speakers as well. If not mastering with headphones, shouldn't you have a separate set of speakers for mastering as well?
I would say like it's more important to get your acoustics right in the room, to get your listening situation, how things are laid out, get that right first, and then the speakers, it's all about learning them in the appropriate environment. So, but
that's great. That's great for you. But let's face it, most of the people watching the show are mixing out of a 10 by 12 bedroom because their kid went to college and they're empty nesting and they've taken over their bedroom. Obviously, the rule of thumb is no 90-degree corners, so go buy some traps that you can... So what's the brand that you recommend, by the way, that you've had very good luck with?
So I, in my previous big commercial studio, it was all built in, and that didn't work out when I left because I couldn't take it with me. So these aren't real traps. I went with sort of the off-the-shelf stuff that you can just order from the company, and it's all custom built by them, but it is, you see it in the picture. You see some behind me here. This stuff is great because if you change your mind and you want to set up in a different room, you can just set up in a weekend and you're there. I would say like this is where the headphone emulation stuff really comes in handy for this kind of thing and really getting to know that. I would also say, especially with the master giveaway thing, to anybody that I'm talking through their stuff or their mix environment, if we go really deep into like your setup and how we could improve it, there's any tiny number of measures you can take in a room to make it better without spending any money. One simple one I'll give you is most rooms are square, most rooms are rectangular. There's going to be angles in that type of environment in a typical home that are not going to be ideal because you're going to have a bunch of room nodes and points where frequencies cancel. So the most basic thing that you can do if you're setting up in a room like that, outside of putting in better acoustics or getting bass trapping in the corners, is float the speakers off the desk or have them on stands so they're isolated. Do that as much as possible. And when you try to make your desk perfectly fit in the center of the room, or you're getting the angles just right, once you have it in place and you're like near to the front wall but you're right in the middle, move it a few inches to the left or right, because the pure room node of cancellation is at exact measurements. So right in the middle of the room and a third into the room, if your listening position is right there, you're missing a bunch of bass. If you move a few inches, it'll be slightly better because you're skipping the room node that's happening right there. And there's a lot of little things that you can do, angling and just subtle shifts that can change things. And the other thing, I forget which book this was in, but it was a great point. When you're setting up your speakers, in any environment, no matter what the acoustics are, there are measurements, there's recommendations online, how far from the wall, the manufacturers will give you diagrams and all of this. Just have somebody sit there and put the left speaker over here and listen till it sounds good. And that's the position. Put the right speaker where it belongs, listen to that one till it sounds good. You may get a setup that you're like, oh my God, that looks terrible. But if it sounds right, it's right. Okay?
Trust your ears, Bubala.
Yeah. I hope that helped.
That's great advice, because, people get really into it and they whip out the measuring tape and the level and the protractor and they go to town. But you're right. I don't know if you've ever heard this story. I've told it 1,000 times, but Tom Dowd, legendary engineer, OG engineer, producer, truly legendary with, Aretha, the Allman Brothers, Eric Clapton, and kept going up until the mid-'90s, which is great stuff, maybe even the early 2000s. Anyway, he once said to me, do you want me to show you how to get the perfect acoustic guitar sound? I said, sure. He said, get down on your knees. It scared me a little. And then he said, no, not that, you idiot. He literally said, no, not for, he was like, thought I was such an idiot for even having that thought. Scared the crap out of me. But he said, just move your ear around. I'm just going to strum an open G and just move your ear around. Tell me when it sounds great and stop your head. And I went, right there. He goes, that's where you put the microphone. That's how you get a great. Yeah.
It's as easy as that.
It is, but people overthink this stuff. They think it's, whatever. I don't want to spend 5 minutes.
One thing I would say in relation to that, sorry if we're pushed on time, is that the worse your room acoustics, the more interactive your speakers will be, the louder that you run them. Okay? So if you need to listen loud, that's where you would want to go to those headphone systems and get used to those for the loud check or the room simulation louder kind of thing. If you have a smaller set of speakers and you can listen at a lower volume in a poorly set up acoustically room, the less interaction will happen with the bad acoustics. It's still not going to be perfect, but you're not going to excite the lower frequencies that are creating room nodes and cancellation if you're not blasting low end.
If you walk into the room, one clap of your hands and you hear boing, that sound, that fluttery sound, start mixing on headphones. That's probably the best and cheapest solution.
About that like when we built the big Crystal Phonics studio, the one in Virginia, Roger Darcy of Recording Architecture was the designer for that. And we walked in and I'm in my beautiful control room with an SSL console and the whole thing. And I go like this and there's a little slapback in the back of the room. And I said, well, there's a little echo on my clap. What's with that? And he's like, we're not building the room for you to clap. We're building the room for you to mix records. It's in the back corner. It means nothing. Go sit at the desk and mix a record and tell me what it sounds like. And he was right. So,
but those of us who...
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Those of us who've spent any amount of serious time behind a console know that I can't walk into like a church, a restaurant, any large structure with a high ceiling without going like that. My wife was like, geez, you're embarrassing me again. All right, let's give away a free mastering session. By the way, Kevin said, yeah, I'd love to come to the Road Rally. Dude, you have to come to the Road Rally and teach a class on this stuff. You are so knowledgeable, and the fact that you don't come at it like you are above the fray. You are one of them. You understand their world, so I think you're a perfect guy for it. So, and thank you for sharing all this great information. All right, to win this mastering session, let's type in the initial K. You only get to do it once so that nobody puts in 50 of them. And people outside of the U.S. Can enter because we're not sending a book to, like North Korea or anything. And Liz is going to shut her eyes and do the fickle finger of fate. And wherever she stops, that person's going to win the session. So here you go.
Such anticipation building.
I know. If you think of it, you could maybe set up a GoPro or something, or your iPhone on a tripod, and do some clips of what you're doing to whoever the winner's song is. And with their permission, maybe we could do a follow-up episode to kind of show, this isn't representative of all mastering sessions because they're unique to the material, but here's what I did.
Yeah, we can. That would be interesting, actually.
Look, there's Alan Hall saying the chat stuck. Sure, Alan. I'm kidding. I am totally kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time. All right. I think everybody has done their thing. Liz, shut your eyes. Heat up the fickle finger of fate and give that thing the magic touch. Let's see who wins this session. Oh, by the way, while Bridget Nicolini wins. Yay, Bridget. That's awesome. All right, Liz will connect you with Kevin when we're done. Kevin, why don't you give us some URLs for your two websites? I think that people should go check you out.
Yep. The mastering website is cphonicmastering.com.
How do you spell phonic? Is it PH or FO?
PH. CPHONIC mastering.com. And then I just launched the mixing website because I mix half the time. And that is just kevinmcnoldy.com, my name. Hopefully
and McNoldy is MC, not MAC. I made that mistake.
McNoldy.com. And there's links between the two sites to each other, so you can find me.
Great. Well, this was incredibly educational. You were a great guest. Loved having you on the show. I'm so glad that we've reconnected, and
absolutely.
I like you even better now that I know. I don't know why it is, but anybody who's ever sat behind a console, I could do a road trip with, and we could just sit there and talk endlessly. I don't care if we're driving by, this monument or that mountain range or that desert. We'd still be talking audio.
There's so much to talk about. It's so interesting, and there's so much storied history behind it, and like everyone gets to work with plugins based on these real things that we owned. That drove us nuts sometimes, but it's incredible to be in this industry and have started with that, and now be at this point where it's in a computer and I can carry it around. It's fabulous.
And don't forget, you guys, I asked Kevin right before we started this show. He's quite knowledgeable on crowdfunding. So I'm going to be out of town for a few weeks, and I'm going to pre-record episodes like I did last time, have them in the can so that the team here at Taxi World headquarters can just hit play. So Kevin has already agreed to do an episode with me about crowdfunding. So I'm sure that will be equally as educational and fascinating. Thank you so much again, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kevin McNoldy.
Thank you.
On next week's show, I was checking my calendar. I've got Tony Van Veen, who's the president at Disc Makers. He is just pissed off at how independent musicians are being treated by streaming services. So I'm going to let him come on and rant and see if you guys will rant with him. And with that, I wish everybody a great rest of your week. Thanks again, Kevin. You were awesome. And I will see all of you guys next week. Until then, bye-bye. I should get this mastered.
It's on YouTube, though. I don't know that it'll help.